Let's have a look at Psalm 5, which is another lament and another Psalm of David. So we start with the Psalm heading, tells us to the choir master for flutes. So this is musical information, also an indication that it was part of the collection of songs in the choir master's hymnal, so to speak. And it's a Psalm of David, a clear indicator that David is the author, in spite of what the skeptics and the scoffers in the liberal academy would prefer to tell you. So we're looking at another Davidic psalm, and it's another lament. Typically, the way that you identify a psalm as a lament is you're going to find an invocation, a heartfelt cry to God for help, usually in the opening stanza. So this one exactly fits that mold. Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God, for to you I pray. O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch. So this impassioned prayer for help is a clear indication that we're going to be looking at a lament psalm. Typically, we would like to get some idea of what the cause of the problem is. So we're going to scan the psalm looking for indicators of what that might be. Now, frequently in the biblical psalms, because they're used in corporate worship, the particulars of the situation will be generalized. So you're not always going to find concrete descriptors of the underlying situation. And that's intentional because it makes the psalm usable for people who might be in slightly different circumstances, yet experiencing similar emotions. Nevertheless, let's see what we can find. In strophe 2 or stanza 2, which is verses 4 to 6, you can see the small white spaces as markers over there. We're going to find repeated descriptions of wicked people, people who delight in wickedness, the evil, the boastful, evildoers, those who speak lies, and those who are bloodthirsty and deceitful. But the clearest indicator of the underlying context actually comes in verse 8, where he prays, "Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness, because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me." So, although we don't know the details of the situation, the prayer is a response to some crisis that involves enemies opposing David. Sorry, I've got a scratch in my eye. See if I can get that sorted out. So there's some crisis with enemies opposing the psalmist, and the psalm is written in response to that crisis. And these descriptions paint a generalized portrait of these as wicked people who are opposing God and the psalmist. And then there are more descriptions of them. No truth in their mouth, their self is destruction, their throat is an open grave. And then there are prayers for God to judge them and to vindicate the righteous. So the underlying situation is a picture of a righteous person, the psalmist, who is facing a crisis that's brought about by evil enemies, and he is praying for God to vindicate him for his righteousness in that situation. Let's work through it briefly, stanza by stanza, just noting some interesting points. So we've already noted that this opening stanza is an invocation. You'll see references to mourning, 2 references to morning prayers and worship. Hear my voice and I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch. This leads many commentators to theorize that this may have been a psalm used as part of the morning worship rituals in the temple. It's a little to go on. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. We can leave that one open. But there's deep emotion here. We got the psalmist portraying groaning and crying, but at the same time depicting God as King and God, and the one to whom he directs his crisis. There's definitely something for us to learn in that. The psalmists routinely tell us that the righteous run to the Lord in times of crisis. It's tempting to run to other sources. Many Christians will run to other religious beliefs, or will run from God into other sources of hope. The psalmist runs to God and calls him my God and my King and asks him to hear his cry. Great example for us to follow when we're in similar crises. Now, for the rest of the psalm, the stanzas are going to alternate between talking about the wicked and the righteous. So stanza 2 is about the wicked, then stanza 3, verses 7 and 8 is about the righteous. And then stanza 4, 9 and 10, verses 9 and 10, about the wicked again. And then the final stanza, verses 11 and 12, was once again about the righteous. So we have this alternating rhythm of reflecting on the wicked and the righteous, the wicked and the righteous. In stanza 2, verses 4 to 6, there are multiple descriptions of the wicked and then indications of how they relate to God and God relates to them. Let's just note those pictures and try and imagine this as a corporate picture of them, right? So the wicked here are those who delight in wickedness, and God is not someone who does that. They are evil, and because they are evil, they cannot dwell with God. They are boastful, and because they are boastful in relation to God, they cannot stand before his eyes. They are evildoers, and God's response is that he hates evildoers. They are those who speak lies. God is the one who destroys those who speak lies. They are bloodthirsty and deceitful. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful. So the portrait of his enemies is quite a wholly horrible one. And his expectation is that they are not only his enemies, but their behavior makes them God's enemies too. And then we come to strophe 3 or stanza 3, but I. So the psalmist sets himself in contrast to the wicked that he's just described. And then he says, through the abundance of your steadfast love, I will enter your house. Remember, the wicked were those who, where's the phrase? The wicked are those who cannot stand before your eyes. But I will enter your house. I will bow down toward your holy temple. Some would object that the reference to the temple means David couldn't be the author of the psalm. There are easy explanations for that, so don't let that one throw you too much. We won't go into it now. I'll bow down toward your holy temple in fear of you. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me. So this is his contrasting of himself and then praying for the Lord to lead him and make his path straight, because he is the opposite of those who are attacking him. Now the focus returns to the wicked, for there's no truth in their mouth. This is a recurring theme, that they are liars, deceivers. There's no truth in them. Their inmost self is destruction. That's the other side of it, bloodthirsty, destructive, etc. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue, their throat and their grave. Again, vivid metaphors. You need to be working through the imagery in the psalm as you try to trace its message. And now he prays for God to judge them. So there's an imprecatory component to Psalm 5. Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. He prays for the destruction of these wicked enemies. Because of the abundance of their transgressions, cast them out, for they have rebelled. Notice this, not against me, although it was against him, but also against you. But, you notice alternating stanzas start with but. So stanza 3 starts with but I, and here in stanza 5, but let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy, and spread your protection over them, that they may love your name and exalt in you. For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor as with a shield. So a psalm where the psalmist is crying out for God to hear his prayer because he's facing a situation that involves enemies. There's only a general description of what that crisis is, but there's alternating depictions of the enemies can't stand before the Lord. The psalmist will bow before the Lord. the enemies are wicked, and he prays for God to judge them. He and those like him rejoice in the Lord, and he prays for God to bless them.